interesting workshop. What we're going to talk about here in a minute is all of us are affected by an economy, and we're living in a particular society that's set up a certain way, and there's a lot of propaganda about how we have the best system possible, the free enterprise system, and you can see it on television commercials. You see it everywhere. It's propagandized. So we're going to talk about a little bit about looking at the results of our economic system and checking the propaganda against the actual results and seeing if that's true or not. And we're also going to be discussing other forms of economics and history a little bit, and where we might go from here. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes or so at you, and then we're probably going to stop and open up to questions and respond to questions you might have. So I guess, anyone want to start, or you want me to start about the propaganda part?
Sure, that's fine.
All right, so the propaganda is we have the wonderful system that produces what we need as a country. So we have 57 million or 47 million people that were uninsured out of 300,000 people, 300 million people. So that's a sixth of our population that does not get served. Another 47,000,001, this guy just joined. So we have that. We have a distribution of wealth. We have, this is the land of opportunity. You can do whatever you want to do. You can be whoever you want to be. You can become rich and famous, and everything's wonderful. If you're 6'10", weigh 250 pounds, and can dunk, you can make a lot of money. I know that I used to be able to dunk when I was a little younger and taller, but I lost about 10 inches. So, the truth is the top 1% is growing tremendously. The bottom 99 is shrinking. The middle class is shrinking. People have less money to spend. Education, we're providing a great educational system. Let's privatize everything. It's wonderful. The fact is, the United States is low and dropping in competitiveness in mathematics, in everything. There are English foreign students that speak English better than people in town. So I don't want to go on and on and on, because all of you can see this and have experienced this, but I think that's a place to start. We have propaganda about how great the system is, and then we have the results. Usually in a scientific method, you check the theory, you check the results, you adjust the theory. You check it again, and you keep doing it until you find something that works, that's true. This isn't working. And now I think we're going to talk about alternatives and what we might have to do to change those. Don, you want to take over?
Sure. I'm Don McTighe, and my background is basically in the field of...
Can you hear Don?
Can you hear me? Okay.
My
My background is in the field of election law. I've been doing election law for 33 years, and a lot of that has been on initiatives, referendum, and so I'm going to approach this partially from that perspective. First of all, the broader picture, not about elections per se, but we have the history in this country is such that we believe more in the individual than the community. And the concept that you can be anything you want, and the system is set up to allow people to pursue that dream to be anything they want, but it's set up to pursue that at the expense of others. and back when we were primarily an agricultural country, it wasn't that much of an issue to have that kind of mindset. Things changed though when we became more industrialized, and where basically people had to depend more on other people for being able to succeed than depend upon themselves. And so, and where we are now is with a system that either you either have to change the system by either trying to own the wealth, right, by buying the stock, by organizing efforts to take over companies, or at least having enough, not necessarily majority ownership, but enough to affect policy in these companies, or you have to change the laws. Now, changing the laws is a matter of, there's two ways to change laws. One is, of course, with the people we elect, but another way is with the rights of initiative and citizen right of initiative. Ohio is actually, in terms of our right of initiative, is pretty good. Not every, a lot of people are in Ohio don't know this, but many states don't have the right of citizen initiative at the state level. But Ohio does. It was adopted in 1912 as part of the Progressive Era amendments to the Constitution to give power back to the people.
From the Constitutional Convention, I believe.
Right, Constitutional Convention of 1912.
1851 Constitution.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, after that, they were adopted in 1912, actually.
The 38 amendments.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So where we are now is, I think you have to think about, if you want to change things, you either do it through the people you elect or you do it through the right of initiative.
There's a third way as well. Article 16, Section 3 of the Ohio Constitution designates a call for a constitutional convention every 20 years in the state of Ohio. So that's a way that the transactional costs of petitioning have been structurally destroyed or brought within the hands of the people every 20 years. Unfortunately, Ohio won't have a constitutional convention, the call for one, on the ballot till 2032. But as for economics and different systems, excuse me, smoke, and that's just, it's phlegm. But healthcare's an interesting issue, as well as economics. I think that we're talking about solutions right now, or
Well, talking
about problems.
Taking off like from the system, we started off, people were very nomadic and stuff in history. So we went from a tribal society and a tribal structure, which is kind of similar to Native Americans. They didn't own the land. That is a foreign thought to Native Americans. They struggled for range with competing tribes, but they didn't think they owned the land. They occupied it. But so under a tribal structure, you have a certain kind of economics where everyone is sharing and owning, and then you moved into the Industrial Revolution, and then we ended up where Don said. So, some of the alternatives would be what Don was talking about, sharing economies. How can we, inside of where we're at, what can we do? We have food co-ops. We have a concept of worker-owned
Co-ops.
corporations. Like, for instance, many of you have heard of Amana refrigerators. And what was the cutlery?
What?
The cutlery, the old...
Oh, I don't
Anyway,
remember. But there's a steel mill in Youngstown that's a co-op.
Right, there's a co-op steel mill in Youngstown. Amana was a co-op. So they were the largest manufacturer of refrigerators in the country. It was a worker co-op. The biggest cutlery company in the United States was a worker co-op. In Israel, when I was there for a year, the bus company was a worker co-op. The dairy industry was a worker co-op. they were running fine. We had milk every day. The buses ran on time. But that's impossible here. So that's where I want to kind of take conversation a little bit.
Well, and there is a concept called the shared economy, or the share economy, which is coming about as a result of the access to the internet, where people will go online and say, I have, I have these things I don't need anymore that I'm willing to sell or even give away. It's down to even the air of giving away food, and people get into, and now that the share economy, sometimes it's giving away, sometimes it's bartering back and forth, sometimes it's Bitcoin, but it's a variety of things. But that takes power away a little bit from the traditional companies that we're familiar with. The problem is, of course, is that this is going to take really generations unless we figure out a way to move that faster. I believe that it is still better, if we want to try to affect change, we have to affect change in the economy through the ballot. Everybody has one vote, no matter how much money you have. The ballot is the great equalizer. The problem is, of course, is the advertising costs, okay? But we don't, everybody, it's not equal when it comes to that. But it is one way to equalize power, but people have to get behind various efforts. They're coming in today to the festival. A young woman was just outside and asked me to sign not a petition, but a list to get on a grassroots type of mailing list for the beginning of the minimum wage being $15 in Ohio. Okay, you've heard about this has passed in the city of Seattle recently, and now there's a national organization that's trying to move it into other places. And this is where we can really affect change. Now, Chuck mentioned constitutional conventions come up every 20 years. We get to vote on whether to have one. People have pretty much said no. It's a good reason. I urge people to vote no on having constitutional conventions.
I urge people to vote yes. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, the reason is you have to, once we decide to have a constitutional convention, you then have to elect delegates. And unless you're prepared to win a majority of the seats in essentially what is like a state legislature at that constitutional convention, you're gonna be up against some problems. When you do an individual initiative, you're able to basically control what is being put on the ballot. Constitutional convention, you cannot without a majority vote, or majority number of delegates.
Sure. I mean, the transition from organic to mechanical solidarity is described by Max Weber, talking of the transition of human collectivization from, primitive collectivism, hunter-gatherer, earlier agrarian society, to interdependent, non-basic sector economies of scale that, intercity, urban area trade is interesting. We can come back to that. We're mainly focused on economics, but I just wanted to. The 1912 presidents of the Ohio Constitutional Convention essentially made it so that delegates to the Constitutional Convention were elected in pre-existing General Assembly districts, which are currently gerrymandered for the Republican Party. But as well as Article 16, Section 3 gives the General Assembly the ability to decide how the delegates are chosen for a constitutional convention. But it would be possible to challenge that, I believe, through the Supreme Court. But we're digressing further. But that's why I advocated to vote yes, and why I did vote yes for a constitutional convention.
We just mentioned minimum wage. So, let's think for a second about this concept. You do minimum wage by itself, then manufacturers and importers raise prices, then you still can't afford it, 10 years, 15 years later. So we raise minimum wage again. So just raising minimum wage by itself, to me, causes a kind of a spiral. And then, Chuck, why don't you also, Don's going to answer that.
Call me later.
I love you, Chuck Roble.
They're in love. Yeah, Don, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Raising the minimum wage helps people in an immediate fashion. It doesn't solve the underlying problem that we have with the economy.
Exactly.
And getting back to something else you said earlier, is what we have to do. It's not about it's not per se about sharing wealth or about wealth redistribution. It's about sharing ownership of the means of making money. So whether it's manufacturing or retail or what have you, that I think ultimately is where we have to head. We have to head, I think, to a system where perhaps you have a joint ownership, but by the people who perhaps not the investors, but by the people who actually do the work.
So
the investors can invest and earn a profit off investing, but not actually be the owners.
So now we're getting into a very basic subject, which is value theory. The value theory of economics. Is it labor or capital? Capital theory of value means you look at the money part. Whoever controls the money, they control the quote-unquote value. The labor part is labor. This is the basic structural difference between a socialism, capitalism, that sort of thing. It's where's the value? Now, I'm going to get biblical here for a second. If you look at the Bible, almost every major religion has one really thing in common, and by major I'm talking about Western, because I don't know very much about Eastern religions. But Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all have severe restrictions on making money on money. You can't make money on money. You have to have work or equity. You can't make money. So, of course, they've all twisted it. The Islamic courts have come up with Islamic bonds where they give it a little piece of equity so that it slips under the rules. With the Christians, they let the Jews do the money lending because they couldn't. And then when they owed the Jews a lot of money, they threw them out so they didn't have to pay. So it's every single religion says making money on money is not legitimate, it's not workable. So what do we say in America? Let's go make some money, So I'm going to shut up here in a second. So one of the things that happened is 10 years ago, 24% of this economy was manufacturing, which is people making things. And they were getting paid to make things. People were buying them, and the money kept circulating around the economy. That's called the multiplier effect. And then they started importing stuff from other countries with cheaper labor. So the money doesn't get circulated as much in the local economy anymore. All of a sudden, the multiplier effect is gone, which is usually 5 to 7 times. It means when you do an hour's work, 5 to 7 times that money gets circulated back around the economy with your grocery store, your bartender, your cab driver, whoever, your plumber. And then he goes and spends money and goes out to a restaurant. That has switched in 10 years to 14% manufacturing, 24% financial services. Financial services are the people that make what? Chairs? Shirts? What do they make? They make money.
They just administer things.
They make money. It's illegal to go and print money, but they make money. Money, money, money. Money was invented as a means of exchange between people, talking about sharing, barter systems. You know, you get points. You do someone's grass, you get 10 points. You find a restaurant that will serve you dinner for 10 points, you've got a barter system. There is no money involved. But people can't siphon that off. So we've created a system where that can be siphoned off. Hey, Chuck, you want to talk about...
Sure. I want to talk about multiplier effects really quickly.
And also the difference between guaranteed income and
minimum wage.
minimum wage, yeah.
Sure. So Robert Putnam, the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School for Public Policy, in his book Better Together gives a heuristic of what we're talking about of the decrease in industrial sectors of the economy. So industrial sectors of the economy are generally basic parts of the economy. So as a city planner, one can differentiate the sectors of an economy between basic and non-basic sector. So non-basic sector, if we're talking about a city in autarky, so autarky is a city with no trade. That would be where supply equals demand. And so in an autarkic state, the basic sector of the economy, or the non-basic sector of the economy would be 100% of that economy. Whereas in a city trading with other cities or other city-states, other states, there would be basic sector of the economy, which would be the national part, global part. So Detroit got very big because they're exporting cars across the nation, across even the world. And so that's what made it so competitive. So just as for multiplier effects, there definitely is a lot of truth to that of when you have a system, when you have people employed in a task, they have demands in other parts of the economy. You know, a person working at Ford goes to a local cafe or McDonald's or something, and that creates employment in those sectors. But transitioning towards discussing the difference between basic income and minimum wage is interesting. The main transformation in American society that I've found, or at least the economy of America, is due to we've seen major transitions in the sectors of the economy. If you look at Claude S. Fisher and Michael Holt's book, Century of Difference, about 20%, I forget the number, I think it's about 20% of the U.S. economy at the turn of the century was employed in farming and creating food. By 2000, is about 1% of the U.S. population creates food. And so we've become extremely more efficient. A lot of people point at deindustrialization, shipping jobs to China, manufacturing goods in countries with cheaper labor pools and less environmental regulations. But as Gabor already pointed out, automation is the main thing that the American media doesn't discuss, that we've become more efficient at producing goods. And so as we go further in this discussion, I intend to advocate a basic income as an alternative to increasing the minimum wage or even having a minimum wage in the first place. But
Don?
Well, if you're going to have a basic income, I mean, is it a basic income in exchange for labor?
Absolutely not. That'd be a wage.
I think it's because automation makes it so that we can produce so many things that we don't need to do that. It's sort of like the oil sheikdoms. They have all this oil, so of course one family controls it all, but then they end up pretty much guaranteeing a large swath of people a guaranteed income. But can I move to a particular subject here? So all this question here is how do we change things, and how did we get here? Right now, I think if we start with a guy, are you familiar with the Lewis letter, the Lewis Powell letter? There was a letter that was written by Justice Powell.
Justice Powell,
Yeah, before he became the justice. I think. And it was a letter that is being followed now for the last 35 years by the Republican Party, and the letter outlined that they did a really poor job of organizing themselves and what they had to do. And the letter was all about forming a structured legislative program so organizations like the ALEC, which are going to be discussed at 5 o'clock, the American Legislative Council, they were formed. They financed, he recommended the financing of think tanks. So you have all these massive,
Heartland, Heritage, Cato, Competitive Enterprise, sorry.
right.
Many
Yeah.
think tanks. I've been to the Cato Institute.
Yeah, these kind of think tanks, and these think tanks then start generating articles for magazines, articles for news media. You start seeing them on CNN as panelists, experts in their. I'm sorry, I've been here all weekend. Experts in their fields. So people watching television, reading newspapers, are watching someone from, or if you read the Dispatch, you'll see great comments from a member of the Buckeye Institute, which is a think tank here in Ohio. Now, what is the Buckeye Institute, and why did he get a column in the Dispatch to talk about privatizing education? Well, the Buckeye Institute is a right-wing finance think tank in Ohio. Their job is to, quote unquote, educate people. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is to go back to Don, because they have been very successful in changing laws to get themselves into office. They've been very successful changing laws to get rid of deregulation. They are using things that we don't do as progressives very well. And we go back to what to do about this before we open it up to the audience?
Well, yeah, sure.
I mean, a structured system.
Well,
The McTighe doctrine.
Sure. Well, ALEC and the Buckeye Institute have been successful in getting laws changed in terms of being able to control the legislators, getting people, elected into the General Assembly or to Congress. What we have to do is, and now that they've been successful at that, the folks that they've helped to get elected are now cutting back on the right to vote, and that's happening in Ohio. This year, there were 4 pieces of legislation passed, chipping away, taking away opportunities. Now, I say the right to vote. That's a bit of an overstatement, and they'll say they're not suppressing the vote, they're not taking away the right to vote. What they're doing is they're making it harder to vote. You see, it's a matter of semantics. They're making it harder to vote, there's fewer opportunities to vote. Just in February, they passed 2 bills that went into effect June 1st of this month, which dramatically make it harder to vote by absentee or to vote what's called a provisional ballot. So what we need to do is, first and foremost, if we want to be able to ultimately have an impact on the economy and the laws governing the economy, as I said before, there's 2 ways to deal with this. Either you deal with it through the laws, or you deal with it through ownership, right, of the companies. That's the 2 peaceful ways to deal with it. Obviously, there are other ways, but if we're going to deal with it through the legal aspect, through the laws, then we have to protect the right to vote. ComFest is probably more about that than about anything else, judging by what I see here, and you have to pay attention to what's going on. Like I said, 4 bills passed this year by the Ohio General Assembly, reducing opportunities to vote.
So, and remember that what Don said earlier, about voting versus initiatives also. Initiatives means that if you got the Cook brothers buying off politicians and getting people into office by the vote, when the people are against it, and then you put up a ballot initiative, what ends up happening is that no matter who they are, it doesn't matter, no matter what happens, if it goes through on an initiative, that becomes the law and they have to follow it. And if you think about what's been going on in Columbus, we had a bunch of people who are a little bit out of touch about in Columbus that supported the zoo going downtown, a massive zoo, big increase, doubling of the taxes. The people who, all the elected officials were gung-ho supporting that. The people voted that down, and it works in reverse as well. So initiatives are an important part of that.
I think an interesting thing about the zoo, though, is the Koch brothers were funding the Vote No initiative.
Yeah, they were funding no because they believe in no taxes.
Yep.
But the main thing is we had, in a predominantly Democratic city, you know, where people kind of rubber stamp everything for education and zoos and libraries and everything else. That's our history. We're very much want those kind of services to be supported in this city. We voted no for that.
Well,
but
and the point that I made earlier about the right to vote is the equalizer, because you know it's not every vote is worth $1, right? Everybody gets $1 to spend, right? It doesn't matter how much other money you have, and the zoo levy is a good example of that. While the people who were organized against the levy, they were outspent about 30 to 1.
and same thing happened with the education.
Well, yes, right.
Yeah, what was that one about?
Well, that one was the spending on that was it was a little less than, it was probably something like 20 to 1. Yeah.
We have a quick question from the audience.
I think the biggest problem is the gerrymandering, because our vote does not count. If you live in a Democratic district, if you're a Republican, your vote is not going to count. The problem is there's 16 districts that are Republican and only 4 Democrats. So we got to get rid of the gerrymandered system, and the only way to do that is to get a governor, a secretary of state, the people who are on that committee that does the yes. If we would have had a Democratic
Well,
governor,
gerrymandering for political reasons is illegal. The problem is that no one is prosecuting the law because both sides want gerrymandering.
I know, but who's on the board right now? It's a Democrat and a Republican, and then it's the governor, the secretary of state,
And the auditor.
Pardon me?
Auditor.
And the auditor.
State
The auditor, which is all Republican right now.
Right.
And true, Democrats were gerrymandered, but it is the worst gerrymandering there's ever been in the history of Ohio.
Right, and there will be on the ballot, probably not this year, although it could still be this year, but either this year or next year, there's actually going to be a proposal on gerrymandering, but it's a proposal. I know. It's a proposal. I was legal counsel on that petition. But this is one being proposed by the Constitutional Modernization Commission, which is looking at this is in lieu of trying to prevent having a statewide constitutional convention. So they're going to propose a lot of different constitutional amendments. First out of the box is what I hear. First out of the box in terms of what's going to be on the ballot from these folks is something on redistricting or anti-gerrymandering.
I heard it was dead in the water. That
But
modernization thing is kind of
it will be whether or not it'll change anything. I haven't seen the specifics of it, so we'll have to wait and see. But the point is, you are right. I mean, gerrymandering, the severe gerrymandering that has happened, which has been actually made possible through computer technology in terms of being able to get down to determining how people in one block in a city are likely to vote, okay, through through these computer models, we've been able to draw very partisan districts.
But
Partisan.
communities weren't supposed to be split up. Communities are split up. They were supposed
Right.
to be.
No, you're right.
We have a district.
Let's not have a
Right.
discussion. Let's have
So,
questions and.
We'll have to pay attention to what comes up on the ballot next. And if it's bad, if it's not going to change it, vote no.
And don't forget the second thing. Oh, I'm sorry. The second thing that he talked about was, people themselves working by owning their own businesses. Earlier today, I think it was, or I think tomorrow. Tim, is it tomorrow? Never mind. If you look there's a thing called Simply Living is doing a workshop on local. It's tomorrow morning, isn't it?
Today's Sunday.
Oh, it's today. I'm sorry. It was this morning. Anyway, I need more water. Anyway, this morning they had the Simply Living thing on local. Local is very big. Local produce, local food, local wagons, food wagons. And going back, when those kind of local initiatives happen, small stores open up. The Short North is full of stores. They're almost all owner-owned. There's very few chain stores up on High Street over here. All that money stays here. All the employees are here. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to agree that I think gerrymandering is one of the central issues of our time, at least of this time. But I mean, I disagree, though, that, having the Democrats control the reapportionment board would have fixed anything. Thank you. I mean, if we look at the Democrats, Brian Rothenberg endorsed a no vote on the Constitutional Convention, which is to give the people the right to control the state of Ohio. Again, this year, Brian Rothenberg of Progress Ohio then went on to file a writ of prohibition, I believe, to remove the campaign finance reform legislation from the ballot for the city of Columbus. In 2010, the democratically controlled City Council of Columbus passed Issue 12, which made it so that City Council could meet in private to discuss who they'd appoint to get an incumbent advantage before becoming a City
Both
Council
sides are
member.
doing it. Both sides.
Exactly.
Power.
And I mean, in Illinois, so I mean, I think democracy fundamentally, unless people are willing to put aside politics and to let people decide and to not have bullshit electioneering, because that's what it is engineering election using statistics to go down to block levels to give a competitive advantage for one set of ideas over another set of ideas. Until the populace directly addresses that, nothing's going to be resolved in that matter. And I mean, that's never going to be resolved. That's never going to be addressed by the two-party system. The two-party system has a vested interest in keeping people apathetic and, less energetic for change, I feel.
Do we have any?
For what?
We don't have a solution. You have the solution. That I think, we can
We're
suggest
going to digress.
solutions.
I'll give you one after the thing, though.
And they created a very diverse, so if you lived in a district, your vote truly did count. Right now, your vote really doesn't count.
So I don't think districting ever is going to fix anything. Geographically, getting voters to be based on geography inherently is anti-democratic. I mean, that just makes it so whoever's the designer of those districts has an interest to control those and to engineer them. So I think the main solution is a parliamentary system where people run at large and have a proportionate amount of representation in the population. And that, I mean, we can go further
And
into
this is-
that, but I want to give Don.
Go ahead, Don.
Well, in terms of, I don't know if we're talking about the economy anymore, but in terms of the proposal that was on the ballot a few years ago on redistricting, which was, I think, an excellent proposal backed by the League of Women Voters and a number of other groups. There was a lot of effort put into developing that. I was part of the team that did that, although I came in kind of late as the lawyer on that. But the problem with that was all the money went into getting on the ballot, and there wasn't enough money then to win the election for the campaign portion. And the opposition was able to basically outspend significantly. Now, we know that that doesn't always matter, as we've just talked about two recent examples about being outspent doesn't always matter. But it in the end, we could have been outspent and still won if enough people understood and cared about the issue. People understand about raising their property tax, about what the zoo levy would have done in terms of what they would have had to pay out of their pocketbooks. People didn't get exactly what the harm is to them under the present system of gerrymandered districts. And so it became a communication issue. Now, that leads actually into a bigger point that I wanted to make, which we talked about the shared economy being able to affect, in some, I believe right now, in a very small way, the overall economic model in this country. Also, the internet makes available being able to affect the whole communication and the messaging. You mentioned, for example, the Buckeye Institute being able to crank out stuff and get it published by the Dispatch and get good coverage. But less and less people are getting their information from the Dispatch. The internet is where people are going to get their information more and more in the future about how to vote on issues.
The gentleman in the, it's only a gambling problem if I'm losing, please.
Thanks for acknowledging my shirt. I appreciate that. You seem to have the theme of freedom in your discussion, and I was wondering, there was a paper that came out a few years ago that said some level of corruption is actually more efficient for the economy, and would you three gentlemen agree with that statement?
Define corruption.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm an investor and an industrialist, I would prefer it myself. You can pay someone off. If we could do that in Columbus, we wouldn't have to go knock on all these doors to get the permits. We could just bribe the safety department. It would be very efficient. Only then, the people can't do it. It's only the people who have the money to bribe people. So eventually what ends up happening is they hang people, and Marie Antoinette says, let them eat cake and stuff like that. It doesn't lead to a very balanced, stable, long-term situation. And even, if you're planning a life and you want to send your kids to college, or you're investing in a business, you'd like to be able to have a nice, steady economy. I mean, one big problem is just the underlying economics of the economic system do not work. Before I sat down here, I went to children's art and I tried to find a balloon. So what I was going to do to start this off was I was going to blow up a balloon and let it explode, because that's what happens if you keep blowing air into a balloon, unless somehow you can fake the balloon out to make it bigger or stretchier, or have the air bypassed into a second balloon. And that's what, the standard capitalist economic system is a cheat. They change the accounting rules. They change it. It does not work. You can't keep pouring 10% more water into a glass. It will overflow unless somehow you sneak a bigger glass and you use mirrors to make people think it's the same size glass. The numbers don't work. That's the irony of it. It's all based on numbers and finance and statistics. The numbers don't work. You can't have something keep increasing by 6%. And in our current system, if you're a public company and they're buying up everything, if you're a public company and you can't keep increasing your growth, your sales, your revenues, and your profits constantly, you can't. So it's the old joke, the 110% joke. I'm going to sell you 50% of my house, and you 50%, and him 50%, and him, and unless someone catches me at some point, I've got a good cash flow going, you know, and that's kind of what's going on. It's called fractional banking, you know, and it's legal. So there's an underlying structural problem that's based on a certain amount of fallacy. There are equations. Yes, Chuck.
So your question was whether or not corruption's good for an economy? Efficient? I'd say no. As somebody who subscribes to the ideas of Robert Nozick in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, which is along the labor theory of value, that one, from John Locke, that one mixes their labor with an unknown thing to create property. Therefore, the government intervenes to protect private property, and by intervening and protecting private property, that facilitates the ability for interdependent, specialized labor, which creates efficiency. So, you know, corruption, if we're talking about corruption from the sense of violating a public statute or violating the law, essentially imposing a law that you get a competitive advantage because you're able to violate it and other people aren't able to violate it. Essentially, I'd argue that that's less efficient. That's just a kleptocracy.
I mean,
essentially.
corruption causes distortion. I mean, it's a distortion.
Exactly. It's a distortion, so it's less efficient.
And eventually that distortion, you know, causes issues and problems. And you see it all over the world. You have economies all over Central America. If you have enough corruption, you need Saddam Hussein. You need the Shah. You need an autocratic system. Otherwise, and then it works really well for them. You know, it doesn't work very well for the rest of the people, and eventually it doesn't work well for those people. He's dead. He's hung. You know, they can get away with it. The situation in America is that all of that stuff is done little by little, softly. You know, we can go out and buy a new TV, most of us, and we can go out, we've got a car, and we've got all this stuff. We're comfortable enough. If sometimes we have to tighten our belts and move into a smaller apartment, or, you know, buy a smaller car, or drive less, or whatever, but still, we still have a car. We have some disposable income. We can go to Coachella. And if we can't go to Coachella, you can come to ComFest. It's almost as good, you know, probably better. So that's the beauty of the system that has been created here, is that people are kind of okay, you know, and when you're kind of okay, you're thinking it'll get better, but the system right now is sucking the blood out of everybody. Go ahead.
Right, and what you're saying gets back to a point that I made earlier. People, you got to pay attention to what's going on. You can't just be comfortable enough that you're not going to, you know, turn off the TV or turn off Netflix or whatever and go out and get involved. Because eventually more and more gets taken away, and you know, eventually, you know, that results in rebellion. I mean, this is the history of the world, okay? When people are pushed down far enough, and enough people are pushed down far enough, and enough people are being affected, they're going to rise up. The problem is they're going to rise up, and they're going to rise up in a violent way. The question is, how do we do something before that? And it's by getting people to wake up and pay attention and do what can be done right now to change the system.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? You do? She's coming with a mic right behind you.
I'm
Oh.
It's really short. I beg your pardon because English is not my first language. I'm from Chile and I'm living here since 6 months ago. And coming from another country with like similar or higher levels of poverty, it's really impressive to see poverty in this country, because hunger numbers and poverty numbers are like hidden. When you look for information on websites or organizations, United States never put the information. So you come here and you expect something, but you go in the streets. We don't have a car with my husband because we don't need a car, and that's really weird here. But public transportation here is really great, and all the people said, no, it's really bad, it's really great. So in the middle of the winter, when you go and you walk in the streets, you see the poverty, and you see all these sick people donating blood in change of money. And they are all sick, and they cannot feed themselves correctly. And you have the money, you have the food, so I'm really making a mess of this comment. I don't know what to say, but I'm really happy to see people that's thinking about that, but because that's not sustainable anymore, I think. Maybe a couple of years, but I agree with you, this will collapse. It doesn't make sense. People doesn't get out of the cars, they don't see the reality, they just keep buying and buying stuff that they don't need, and like getting money and wasting money, and it really doesn't go anywhere. I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about this, but it really looks weird coming from other place. And in Chile, we have more poverty, but here is saddest, you know, because people there, they are feeding themselves some way. We have land, and maybe our politics are in somehow better, but here it's super sad to see all these people, and you don't know that.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry if I was too hard with this opinion.
Would you like to ask a question? And then I'm going to close it off here. I just have one
This will
little...
be short and sweet. When I got out of the high school back in the late 60s, I lived the American dream. Plenty of jobs. You could get a job anywhere. I went in the service, come home, and there was jobs everywhere, you know. And I worked in a steelworkers union for 37 years, got to retire early, and I'm living the American dream. But back in the 80s, when they started taking jobs to Mexico and all these other countries, that's okay a little bit, and helping other nations, okay, but you can't take and keep taking jobs after jobs after jobs, and they keep importing all this stuff. The people that's going to school and getting out of college and trade schools, there's no jobs here. If you don't have jobs here, you can't pay taxes, and that's how we have public officials. That's what I just want to say. Thank you.
Okay, it sounds like this is winding down. I've loved it, but for what we can do going home from this tent, many of you may not realize that there is a well-funded organization whose object is to name one thing in every county in the United States after Ronald Reagan. Every time you hear someone say, oh, but wasn't Ronald Reagan really good? Wasn't he? You need to tell them. Ronald Reagan was a simple-minded ignoramus. His only skill was that he could get up and make a very sincere-sounding speech. The policies that he advocated have been uniformly disastrous for this country, and there's a laundry list of articles and TV programs and such that you can steer people to. But when they say, oh, but wasn't Reaganomics so good, you need to tell them right up front, no, they weren't.
And that speaks to how we started the conversation about propaganda. I want to say one more thing, and this is kind of transplanted. During World War II, there was a German priest that was famous for a speech he made. And the speech was When they came after the gay people, I wasn't worried because I wasn't gay. When they came after the gypsies, I wasn't worried because I wasn't a gypsy. When they came after the socialists, I wasn't worried because I wasn't a socialist. When they came after the Jews, I wasn't worried because I wasn't a Jew. When they came after the Catholics, I wasn't worried because I wasn't a Catholic or whatever. Finally, it is when they came after the Catholic priests who were anti-Nazi, there was no one to speak out for me. So actually, he said, when they came after the Jews, I didn't speak up because I wasn't Jewish. So this is our situation right now, We're all under this, and if we don't act and we don't speak, there's going to be nobody left, to speak for us. You're going to end up on your own with, your bills and no protection, no consumer protection, no environmental protection. We all have to take it upon ourselves to participate, and you have to be able to choose. And that's what ComFest is about. We have all these not-for-profit or activist organizations out there, sitting there. Pick anything you feel strongly about. Don't assume anyone's going to do it for you. Pick something to get involved with. Spend your time, your energy. It's the only way things are going to change. ComFest, if anything else, is an activist organization. We disagree about some things, but we all agree that it's up to us. This whole festival is volunteer run. So please go out and choose whatever you want to participate in. Sign up for it. Make a commitment in your life. It's the only way we're all going to get better. Thank you very much for coming. Don, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Chuck, thank you very much. What's up next? Who's the MC?
And don't forget to vote.